The ceramic mug hit the kitchen tiles with a final, explosive crack. Shards skittered across the floor, a pool of cooling tea spreading around them. The sound hadn't even finished echoing before my dad's voice roared from the living room. "What was that? What have you done, Shirley?" I didn't move to clean it up. I just stood there, very still, one hand coming to rest on the gentle, still secret curve of my stomach. I took a slow breath, the kind that steadies a quaking voice. This time, I wouldn't let it shake. My mom, Elizabeth, appeared in the doorway from the stairs, a basket of damp laundry propped on her hip. Her eyes darted from the mess on the floor to my face. Dad barreled into the kitchen. "Well, I'm pregnant," I said. The words were clear, level, a stone dropped into still water. Silence. Thick and heavy. Mom's grip on the laundry basket tightened, her knuckles bleaching white. The color drained from her face, leaving 2 spots of high, nervous pink on her cheeks. Her damp hands left dark prints on the plastic. You're only 18, she finally breathed out, the words barely audible. "Shirley, are you out of your mind?" Dad stepped closer, his presence filling the space. His face was a storm cloud, jaw locked, a muscle ticking near his temple, veins corded on his neck. "Who is he?" he demanded, each word a hammer strike. "Some loser? Some deadbeat? Tell me you didn't throw away your future for him." He was breathing hard, as if I'd punched him in the gut. I met his glare. "His name isn't important. What's important is that I love this baby and I'm keeping it." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped him. "You've ruined your life. Do you understand that? We gave you everything. A home. A future. We had money set aside for your degree. And you just threw it all away for this." His gesture swept over me, dismissive and furious. A sharp ache bloomed in my chest, but I held my ground. "I didn't throw anything away. You're just furious, because this is something you can't control." His control snapped. "Get out," he shouted, the sound raw in the quiet house. He jabbed a finger toward the stairs. "Go pack your things. You want to play at being an adult? Then go live like one." My gaze flew to Mom. A silent plea. She was my last hope for a lifeline, for a voice of reason. But her eyes were wide with shock and something worse, shame. She looked at me, then at my father's rigid back, and gave a small, helpless shake of her head. Her whisper was a knife to the heart. "You've disappointed us so much." That was it. No, who is he? No, do you need help? No, are you okay? Just judgment, condemnation, and an eviction notice. But they didn't know. They didn't know about the tiny studio apartment I'd already secured with cash from 3 months of secret weekend shifts. They didn't know about the administrative job at the Westbrook Clinic that started in 2 weeks. And they certainly didn't know the truth about the baby's father, a truth so far from their assumptions they would have called me a liar. I didn't argue. I went upstairs, filled a single, sturdy travel bag with practical things, and walked back out. I passed them in the foyer without a word. The fire in my chest was a quiet, focused blaze, hotter than any tears or screams. At the threshold, I even allowed myself a small, private smile. Because I knew what they didn't. This wasn't an ending. It was my beginning. And I was ready. 15 years later, they stood on my porch, about to look into their grandson's eyes for the very first time. The cost of that long-ago eviction was a bill they were only now beginning to read, and their faces paled in the afternoon light as they took in the woman answering the door. But that came later. My first night in the studio apartment was a lesson in cold. Real, biting cold. No furniture, just a thrifted mattress on the bare floor and a single window with a hairline crack that sang a thin, mournful tune with every gust of wind. I sat wrapped in my coat, eating lukewarm soup straight from the can, my phone a dark and silent brick beside me. No calls. No pleading texts from Mom. I hadn't expected any. In their eyes, I was no longer Shirley. I was a cautionary tale. The girl who threw it all away. But I wasn't broken. Because beneath my coat, I had my child. And in my wallet, I had a key card for the Westbrook Clinic. 3 weeks before the mug shattered, I had landed the job. A secret I'd kept close. The pay for the administrative position was minimal, but Dr. Weston, The elderly physician who ran the practice had looked past my age and seen only my willingness. During the interview, his eyes had flicked to my hands, which I'd kept clasped tightly in my lap. "Can you be here at 6:30? Can you handle difficult patients?" he'd asked. When I'd said yes, he'd simply nodded. "Then the place is yours. If you're ready to work, we're ready to have you." It became my anchor. Every morning I arrived as the sun was rising. I filed, I scheduled, I managed patient flow with a calm efficiency that belied the storm inside me. As my belly swelled, so did a new, unshakable determination. I didn't lean on counters or ask for lighter duties. I worked until the last light was turned off. The nights were for building a different future. On a second-hand laptop, I consumed every free online course I could find: accounting principles, business management, introductory law, economics. The glow of the screen was my lamp. Survival was the baseline. I was aiming for transformation. I wanted to become someone my parents wouldn't even recognize in a crowd. To fuel that focus, I had to sever the digital tether to my old life. One night, I logged into social media and saw a cascade of photos from my cousin Sierra's university graduation. Beaming smiles, proud parents, a caption about bright futures. My mother had liked every single one. The pang was physical, a sharp twist beneath my ribs. That was the world I was supposed to inhabit. The ghost life I had forfeited. My finger hovered. Then, with a calm finality, I didn't just log out. I went into the settings and turned off every notification, every alert. I closed the window. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of purpose. The past was a country I had no visa to re-enter. My borders were now defined by the clinic, this cold room, and the future I was coding line by line, lesson by lesson, in the dark. By the 7th month, I was running on a frayed wire. My days belonged to the clinic, the ringing phones, the scent of antiseptic, the steady rhythm of tasks. My nights were sold to a dimly lit call center, my voice a calm monotone offering tech support to strangers while my body ached for rest. I existed on granola bars and stolen naps on bus rides, a ghost fueling a machine. The machine broke one Tuesday afternoon. The world tilted at a bus stop, the pavement rushing up to meet me. I came to slumped against the plexiglass shelter, my head swimming, my whole body trembling. A silent, terrified cry was stuck in my throat, my hands pressed protectively over the hard swell of my belly. I was 20 years old, and I was failing. Not just at some abstract notion of success, but at the basic act of keeping us both alive. That's how Dr. Weston found me. He was leaving late after a patient, his worn leather bag in hand. He didn't exclaim. He didn't hover. He simply knelt, his old knees cracking on the concrete, and placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Shirley." He helped me to his car, canceled his remaining appointments with a terse phone call, and sat with me in a quiet examination room. A nurse brought me juice and crackers. The shaking slowly subsided, replaced by a wave of hot, shameful tears I couldn't stop. "Are you okay, Shirley?" he asked, his voice low. "No," I whispered, the honesty ripped from me. "But I will be." He studied me for a long moment, his eyes wise and tired. He didn't ask about family. He didn't lecture me on self-care. He just nodded, as if accepting a treaty. Then he reached into his bag, pulled out a sealed envelope, and placed it in my hand. "My sister, Rachel, is the head of accounts payable at Harrington Medical. Give this to her. She's expecting you." I stared at the crisp paper, my name written in his precise script. "Why?" I managed, my voice raw. "Why are you doing this?" A sad, knowing smile touched his lips. "Because you remind me of someone I once failed to stand by. A long time ago. I won't make that mistake a second time." In that moment, I wasn't just his employee. I was a chance at redemption. That single act of grace changed the trajectory of my life. 2 months later, my son, Landon, was born. When they placed him in my arms, this impossibly small, perfect creature with a shock of dark hair and eyes that already seemed to hold the depth of the universe, I cried. But these weren't tears of fear or the crushing loneliness of the past months. They were tears of profound, staggering worth. He was the answer to every hunger pang, every exhausted bone, every silent night. He was worth it all, 100 times over. In that hospital bed, I made a silent vow to his sleeping form: you will never, ever feel like an extra. You will never feel like a burden someone had to carry. Not the way I did. The years ahead I knew would be paved with sacrifice. More hunger. More sleepless nights. But the vague dread had crystallized into a plan. If my parents thought their exile would make me disappear into failure, they had no idea who they had actually unleashed. I didn't have a detailed map, just 3 coordinates: my son, the tentative job Dr. Weston's letter might bring, and a desire to prove them wrong that burned hotter than any fear. Landon was only 2 months old when I returned to the night shift. This time, the commute was from my mattress to the second-hand desk crammed into the studio's corner. The work was for Harrington Medical, endless digital reports to input, stacks of invoices to sort and code. It was tedious, precise, and a lifeline. Dr. Weston's sister, Rachel, was a woman carved from crisp linen and sharp intellect. She hadn't offered me a title or a generous salary. She had offered something more valuable: a chance, with clear, non-negotiable terms. Meet every deadline, she'd said, her voice devoid of warmth but not of fairness. Provide no excuses. And understand this above all: no one is coming to save you. Your reliability is your only currency here. I took her words as my manifesto. I didn't wait for salvation. I built a routine in the quiet, dark hours. I learned to type with one hand while Landon nursed in the crook of my other arm. The glow of the monitor was our nightlight. On weekends, while he napped, I took on additional data entry gigs, each one a brick in our foundation. Slowly, deliberately, I began teaching myself the language of stability: how to navigate budgeting software, audit a spreadsheet for errors, decipher the basic clauses of a service contract. The transformation began to show on the outside. I combed thrift stores for structured blazers that fit my post-pregnancy frame. I bought a single pair of reliable, low-heeled shoes. The girl in the hoodie was fading, replaced by a woman who moved with an economy of motion and a quiet, steady confidence. The world noticed. The pitying glances or dismissive tones I'd sometimes encountered evaporated. At the rare in-person meetings at Harrington, I was treated not as a teenage mistake, but as a capable individual with purpose, a woman with plans. When Landon turned 2, we traded the studio for a small townhouse on the outskirts of Chapel Hill. It was modest, with carpets that would need replacing and a bathroom stuck in the last decade. But it had clean floors that were ours to scrub, a tiny, fenced backyard where he could chase dandelion fluff, and a solid front door with a lock I controlled. No one could tell us to leave. On moving day, I framed a particular photograph: Landon at his first birthday party, his face smeared with chocolate cake, laughing with unabashed joy, one tiny hand patting the balloon tied to his high chair. I hung it right by the entrance. It became my touchstone. Every single time I walked in, exhausted from a double shift or weighed down by some new challenge, I would stop and look at that face. It held the entire reason. It was the fuel and the destination. It was why I never gave up. The silence from my parents was a presence in itself. For years, it filled the spaces in my life: no birthday calls, no concerned letters, not a single attempt to trace the daughter they'd cast out. Their world, as I glimpsed it through the accidental window of a forwarded family newsletter or a stray social media post from my aunt, continued its perfect, curated orbit. My cousin's acceptance to Duke. My brother's elegant wedding to a rising star in a law firm. Every image was a study in polished success, a glossy brochure for a life I was no longer in. I was the edited-out paragraph, the forgotten chapter. And then I became something else. I was 26. I sat in a sleek conference room at Harrington Medical, across from Rachel and 2 senior executives. I was there to present data, a supporting character in a meeting about fiscal projections. As the discussion wound down, Rachel didn't look at the executives. She looked directly at me, her sharp eyes holding mine. Without a word, she slid a single, elegant folder across the polished table. "We're establishing a new regional operations division," she stated, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the air conditioner. "You've been indispensable in the shadows for too long, Shirley. It's time to step into the light. Time to take the reins. I blinked, my mind scrambling to parse the words. Take the reins, I echoed, my professional composure faltering for a second. A genuine, rare smile touched Rachel's lips. It wasn't warm, but it was filled with absolute certainty. You're being promoted. Effective immediately. Operations manager. Your starting salary will be $138,000 annually, with full benefits. She paused, knowing exactly where my mind would leap. The position includes access to the executive daycare center. Landon has a spot, if you want it. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a sound that was part gasp, part sob. I stared at the folder as if it might contain a mirage. The number echoed in my head, a figure that meant security, choices, a future I had only dared to blueprint in my most secret hopes. You've earned every single cent, Rachel continued, her tone leaving no room for argument or false modesty. And before your instinct tells you to doubt or decline, silence it. We need your mind, your discipline. This company needs you. She leaned forward, just slightly. And Landon needs the woman who earns this. The rest of the meeting was a blur. The moment I was alone in the hallway, my phone was in my hand, my fingers trembling as I dialed the elementary school. This is Shirley Carter, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'm coming to pick up Landon early today. I didn't offer an explanation. I just ran to my dependable, second-hand car, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure, disbelieving triumph against my ribs. The forgotten chapter was writing its own headline. He was 8 years old. Time had transformed the baby into a boy with a riot of chestnut curls, intelligent green eyes that missed nothing, and a smile that had, quite literally, been the light that got me through 1,000 dark nights. He climbed into the car after school, his backpack tumbling to the footwell. Where are we going? He asked, expertly clicking his seatbelt. Home, I said, the word feeling new and profound on my tongue. I glanced at him, my smile unstoppable. To our new home. That evening, in a quiet realtor's office, I signed the lease for a house. Not just any house. It stood in an old, graceful neighborhood where ancient oaks lined the streets. It had 3 bedrooms, high ceilings that held the light, and a proper garden in the back. The most significant line on the document was the method of payment, a bank transfer for the full first year up front. No mortgage. No permission needed. It was a transaction of pure, hard-won independence. But our story, mine and Landon's, had a quiet chamber I had sealed shut. There was a part one had never shared with anyone, not even him. The identity of his father was my most guarded secret. Not out of shame, and certainly not because the man was unkind. It was because he had entrusted me with a fragile piece of his own life, and I had chosen to protect it. The truth was, he wasn't a fling or a deadbeat. He was a brilliant, overwhelmed first-year resident at Johns Hopkins named Roger, who had done a short rotation at the Westbrook Clinic. We met over a misplaced patient file. What sparked between us wasn't rebellion. It felt like recognition, 2 people seeing the weight and ambition in the other. It was real, but it was also impossibly fragile. His family, prominent and traditional, had maps for his future that did not include a teenage clinic clerk from Raleigh. The pressure was a wall. 2 weeks after we met, he left for a prestigious fellowship in Boston. The goodbye was a tense, sad thing. When I called him later to say I was pregnant, there was a long silence on the line. Then, with a resolve that sounded like pain, he made his offer: financial support. A structured, discreet arrangement. It was clean, legal, and it would have made Landon a line item in a budget. I said no. I thanked him, and I never called again. I didn't want my son to be a transaction, a secret stipend, a complication to be managed. I wanted his life to begin free of that negotiation. I wanted him to be mine, fully and completely, so I could give him a love that asked for nothing in return. The silence I maintained was not a punishment to Roger. It was the first and greatest gift I could give to our child, a story that started with choice, not contract. 15 years. A lifetime for the son they'd never met. A hard-fought era for me. The letter arrived last fall, forwarded from the general reception at Harrington Medical to my office. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting on it, my mother's, was a relic from a past life. It was shakier now, the loops uncertain, as if written during a minor earthquake. "Shirley, your cousin mentioned you might live in the area now. We didn't know how else to reach you. We would like to see you. And to meet your son. Please, if you are ready to talk." I sat in my ergonomic chair, behind a desk that was now mine, and held the paper for nearly an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the hot surge of old anger. Instead, a profound, settling coldness filled my core. The feeling wasn't about their words, which were careful and empty. It was the chilling realization of just how vast the canyon between us had grown. They had no concept of the ground they were trying to cross. They were writing to a ghost they imagined, not to the woman who had been built in her absence. My response was a model of clinical efficiency. I sent a brief email to the address provided, inviting them to my home the following Saturday at 3 p.m. I offered no details, no neighborhood hint, no job title, no charming anecdotes about Landon. I gave them only an address and a time. I wanted them to have no buffer, no prepared narrative. I needed them to walk up to the very kind of door they'd once shut me out of, and I needed the reality of it to land with the full, unsoftened weight of truth. The car, a sensible sedan waxed to a high gloss, pulled into my driveway 10 minutes early. Of course. My father, Roger Carter, had always believed punctuality was a form of control, and earliness was a power move. He was a man who made entrances. After 15 years, there they stood on my porch. My mother clutched a small, expensive-looking handbag, her posture rigid. My father had his hands in the pockets of his tailored trousers, surveying the front garden with the evaluative air of a potential buyer. They were dressed for a subdued social event, a luncheon, perhaps, or a meeting with a financial advisor. They did not look like people coming to mend a rupture in the universe. They looked like they were paying a somewhat awkward, obligatory visit. They had come to see the daughter they'd discarded, but they carried themselves like guests arriving at a country club, unsure if they'd remembered the correct dress code. I watched them through the tall window. My mother's knuckles were white where she gripped her purse. Her gaze, sharp and nervous, performed a frantic inventory of the yard, the manicured hedge, the wooden swing hanging from the old oak, the painted steps leading to my door. She leaned toward my father, her lips moving rapidly. I could almost hear the whispered debate. Is this a moment for a warning or a prayer? I pulled the door open before their knuckles could make contact with the wood. The movement was smooth, controlled. My father's shoulders snapped back in instant tension. My mother's jaw went slack, her mouth forming a soft O of disbelief. They did not recognize me. The girl they had cast out, the one in the faded hoodie, drowning in fear and defiance, was gone. In her place stood a woman whose posture spoke of quiet authority, whose calm gaze offered no apology. I wore a simple cream silk blouse, tailored black trousers, and the single strand of pearls Landon had proudly presented to me for my last birthday, bought with his own saved allowance. I hadn't uttered a syllable, but the message was received. "Shirley," my mother exhaled, the word a puff of stunned air. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to grant them passage. They crossed the threshold hesitantly, their movements stiff, unsure of the protocol for this unprecedented visit. The home they entered was a portrait of earned peace. Afternoon light, softened by linen curtains, spilled across gleaming hardwood floors. Walls were adorned with framed photographs, landscapes, Landon at various ages, abstract art. The air carried the rich, comforting scent of freshly ground coffee and the faint, clean perfume of lavender from a vase on the console. "Nice place," my father managed, his voice tight. It wasn't praise, it was an involuntary confession of shock. The subtext screamed in the space between us. "How is this here? How did you build this without us?" I offered no explanation. His statement wasn't a question seeking an answer. "Landon is upstairs. He'll be down in a moment." They stood anchored in the center of the living room, as motionless as visitors in a gallery, afraid to touch the exhibits. "I have to admit," I began, my tone neutral, "I wasn't certain you'd respond." My mother's eyes found mine, blinked twice as if to clear a vision, and she spoke with a sudden, blunt clarity. "We were wrong. I let the silence that followed hold the weight of her admission. We thought we were protecting you, she continued, her words gaining a desperate momentum. We believed if we were firm enough, you'd see sense. We never actually believed you would go. That, I replied, my voice low and even, devoid of bitterness or triumph, was the entire point. My father shifted his weight, a familiar defensive gesture, crossing his arms over his chest. You have to understand, Shirley. You were just a child. You had no plan, no means. I had a child, I interrupted, the words clean and sharp. I had a job. And I had more character than you credited me with. He turned his face away, a muscle working in his jaw. The silence that descended then was dense and alive, thrumming with the accumulated weight of 15 years of unsaid words, unanswered calls, and unlived moments. And then, the sound that fractured it, the confident, familiar cadence of footsteps coming down the stairs. Landon appeared on the stairs. He was dressed in a dark navy sweater and clean jeans, his chestnut curls tamed but still full of life. He carried himself with a calm that belied his years, his shoulders already hinting at the man he would become, his eyes a clear, kind green. He was, simply, a happy child. The air of secure, unconditional love around him was almost tangible. Landon, I said, my voice a gentle anchor in the tense room. These are your grandparents. He blinked, taking them in with open curiosity, then walked to my side with a natural composure. Hello, he offered, his tone polite and neutral. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father took an involuntary half-step forward, his mouth working silently. But their shock at his resemblance to me was instantly eclipsed by what he carried. He had brought 2 framed photos from the bookcase. He handed the first to my mother. In it, a beaming Landon, a few years younger, stood beside a tall, smiling man in a crisp white doctor's coat at what looked like a science museum. That's my dad, Landon stated, plain pride in his voice. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon at Massachusetts General. He comes for 2 weeks every summer, and he sends me a new book on the 1st of every month. He related a simple fact, a normal part of his world. My mother's fingers trembled so violently she nearly fumbled the frame. Before the implication could fully settle, Landon handed my father the second photograph. This was a professional shot. In it, I stood at a sleek podium emblazoned with the Harrington Medical logo, addressing a conference room. Surrounding me, leaning in with attentive respect, were members of the executive board. And this is Mom, Landon said, a slight, confident smile touching his lips. After her big promotion. She's the director of operations. Basically, she runs everything there. Then, the collapse. My father's face lost all its color. It was as if a vacuum had sucked the air and every assumption from his lungs. He stumbled back a step, his hand groping for and clutching the back of the sofa for support. His eyes, wide and disbelieving, locked on me. You, he whispered, the sound raw. You built all this. His gesture was feeble, encompassing the house, the child, the undeniable evidence of a life monumental in its success. I looked at him, my expression serene. But that calm was the final layer over a foundation of countless sleepless nights, silent tears swallowed, profound loneliness endured, and every obstacle they assumed would shatter me. No, I corrected him, my voice clear and absolute in the hushed room. I built myself. A silence fell then, so deep and total that the only sound was the gentle, persistent tap of a maple branch against the windowpane, a quiet reminder of a world outside that had continued turning without their permission. My father did not sit. He remained standing, rigid, as if sitting would be a form of surrender his body refused to allow. Perhaps his pride forbade it, perhaps his legs simply would not comply. My mother, still clutching the photograph of Landon and his father, slowly lowered herself onto the very edge of the sofa cushion, as if afraid to claim any real space. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged, only a silent, stunned gasp. Landon stood beside me, a portrait of calm assurance. He wasn't confused or intimidated. He possessed a simple, profound understanding. These 2 people were strangers. His history, his daily life, his sense of family did not include them. Now they were visitors in a home they had not built, gazing upon a grandson they had not nurtured, facing a woman they had tried to erase from their narrative. My father finally cleared his throat, the sound rough in the absolute quiet. "I didn't realize you had contact with the father," he said, grasping for a fact he could possibly process. "I didn't," I replied. "Not for many years." He wanted to provide support, to be involved from a distance. I declined. I wanted Landon's world to be built on peace, not on secrecy or contractual obligations. No broken promises. When Landon turned 10, I allowed a relationship to begin. On my terms. With clear boundaries. Then my mother spoke, her voice frayed and trembling. He's so wonderful, Shirley." "Thank you," I said quietly. She looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears. "We were so wrong. Back then." I said nothing. The apology was a pebble dropped into a canyon. The echo came far too late to matter. Suddenly, my father's voice cut through, sharper and louder. It wasn't anger. It was the raw sound of a man realizing the scaffolding of his own certainty had collapsed. "You could have called. You could have come back. We would have helped you." "No," I interrupted, my own voice gaining a tremor that was not weakness, but the seismic release of long-buried truth. "You told me to get out. You did not ask if I had a plan. You did not ask if I was safe or scared or okay. You believed the very worst of me and made a decree. I was no one to you anymore." I took a steadying breath, the weight of every one of those years solidifying into a final, unshakable verdict. "You exiled your own daughter on the most terrifying day of her life. And now you sit on a sofa I paid for, in a home I earned, and speak as if we're discussing a minor misunderstanding." My mother broke then, soft sobs shaking her shoulders. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over. "I am so sorry for everything." I looked at her, and for the first time in 15 years, I felt a hollow, neutral peace. No fiery anger, no aching grief. It was simply spent. "I forgave you a long time ago," I said slowly, nodding. "But forgiveness is not a reset button. It does not mean we start over." My father was adrift, his arrogance replaced by a dazed shock. "Shirley," he stammered, "you don't have to. There's no shame in." "Dad," I said, my voice clear and final. "I raised a son who understands respect. Who knows that real love isn't conditional. I became the woman you were certain I could never be. And now you stand in the life I built for myself, breathing the air of my own making." I turned to Landon, my anchor. "Go get your jacket, sweetie. We're going to the bookstore." He nodded, a quick, understanding glance passing between us, and went upstairs, his footsteps light and sure. My mother wiped her cheeks with a trembling hand. "Will we see you again?" I paused, holding her desperate gaze with my steady one. "That will depend entirely on you. On whether you genuinely wish to know your grandson, or if you prefer to continue living as though the past, and I, never existed." With that, I walked them to the door. They stepped out onto the porch, two pale, diminished figures silhouetted against the autumn light. I did not offer an embrace. I did not say goodbye. I simply closed the door, hearing the soft, definitive click of the latch. And for the first time in 15 years, I was the one securely inside. I remained in the warmth of the home I built, surrounded by the love I fostered, standing firmly in the future they were once so certain I would never have.